Welcome to Mimi P. LLC, where body safety and confidence are essential to mental health. I'm Mimi P., and I will be quoting from the National Children's Alliance.org website, which state over 600,000 cases of child abuse is reported each year in the United States. Of that, 10%, 60,000 cases are reported of sexual abuse. How are we doing in the United States to protect our children? As well as the RAIN, and that's 2N.org, agrees with that statement and goes further to say that sexual child abuse can be long-lasting and affect their mental health. Let's get some answers to this. Welcome me in joining Dr. Barbara Scott Johnson, who is an Ohio State graduate of university, as well as 35 years across the board of development. Greetings and thank you, Dr. Scott Johnson. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me this afternoon, Mimi P. I really feel privileged to be here to talk with you and the audience.
Well, thank you. I'd like to first ask, how are we as the United States with so many cases? Why are we lingering and not protecting our children? And is this only a female crime?
Well, I'd like to say that I think, we still have a lot of work to do. I think if you go back 15, 20 years, we've done so much over that time for looking at ways to protect our children better. But is it only a female crime? Absolutely not. We have females being abused as well as males being victimized as well.
What can a parent or guardian do to protect their child from becoming a victim of child sexual abuse?
Well, although I don't work with the younger group now, I started out in my early years working with children and parents. And one of the things that I would tell them then, and I believe today, is that we have to educate our children. Just as we try to teach them manners, just as we try to teach them healthy lifestyles, we also need to teach them about their safety. So I would say to parents, continue always to tell your children about good touch, bad touch. Continue to tell them about stranger anxiety. In doing so, what you also do is allow children to know that you are someone they can come to talk to if something were to happen or something they're not sure about is happening.
Okay, and in your experience, since they say it could be long-lasting and can develop with some mental health issues, what are your cases of which you can give us some kind of information about how it affected them as an adult?
Okay. Well, first I'd like to say that my what I'm going to share is a compilation of 30 plus years. So even though for the audience it may sound like a particular case or may sound familiar to you, I'm not going to be talking about any particular person or any particular case for confidentiality. But what I can say is, since I've had the privilege of working as a developmental, I graduated from a developmental program, and I was specializing in clinical child, and for the last 20 years have worked in a clinical capacity with adults. So I would say that I have had work across the lifespan, from the young child, the infant, to now the older adult, and some of those who are even older than, in the senior level. So I can tell you to be what I've seen across the lifespan. And children who have been abused, I deal so much today in my private practice with females, and I work for the correctional system the last 20 years with males. Abuse in the younger childhood years can affect them and can continue to affect them and to be a source of trauma for them as they enter adulthood.
Well, tell me, how does that go? What does that play out to be in adulthood?
Well, it typically is affecting them in so many behavioral and emotional ways. And some of the things that I see I from females and males can overlap, and then there's some ways that they don't. So let me tell you some of the things that overlap. For both males and females, I see a lot of self-esteem issues. I see issues of guilt. I see there may be nervousness, there may be fear, there may There may be feelings of abandonment. There may be times that the relationship, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship issues, because in females, a lot of times I see women who have relationships that get sabotaged. They may have trouble with attachment issues, trying to connect with a significant partner and feeling safe with that partner, that they want to continue in that relationship. So therefore, there's a lot of conflict and tension in the relationship. With males, the same thing happens, and a lot of times with my males, I talk with them, males, about finding mates that help to enhance them, that it should be somebody that makes you better. And what I see a lot of times with males is they may bed hop. They go from one mate to another mate. They want someone, and again, this is from those that I see in the correctional system. They may want someone who can take care of them. But also, I see them in abusive relationships where they may become physically abusive, or they have a lot of relationships that are feeling disconnected. They may be what I call a parent that is the absent parent. So you see a lot of problems as the abused child may grow up into adulthood, not only in the relationships, not only in their emotions, how they work in their career. So it can be an ongoing problem.
Well, one thing, as I say in my book about my body as a sacrifice, is I try to make an understanding it's essential that they understand that body safety does play a role in self-confidence. How do you say that?
Well, again, body safety is important. But what happens often with someone who has been abused and traumatized as a child, they have a lot of insecurities. They may have, as I mentioned, self-esteem problems. They may have trouble feeling that they are important and valued. I see this a lot with females who it's very hard for them to feel that they're important, that they matter. What I talk to them a lot about is self-care, making sure that they are identifying their own needs. While that can be an issue with many women, particularly those who have been traumatized, sometimes find it very hard to feel that they're important and that their needs are important. With males, similarly, they may deal with self-esteem issues. They may deal with pride issues. I find, particularly with males, it's very hard for them to talk about being an abused victim.
Well, answer me this, because you said about their self-confidence and how they struggle.
Yes.
Today we advertise a lot about sex on TV. You gotta have a boob job, whatever it is, but that's not helping with self-confidence, is it?
Well, I would say that people we're living in a different time, Mimi P. So again, people. And again, it doesn't have to be somebody who's abused. Sometimes they feel that they don't like how they look. They don't like how they feel. So they try to make an external decision, to make an external change to feel better. Now, again, I got different ways of thinking about that. For some people, maybe that's a good way to handle it. If, again, it fixes or helps, is a healthy decision. Because a lot of times what I talk to my clients about is you can do some external things, but if the problem is internal, you're going to still carry that problem. So that's why I talk a lot about what's going on in the mind, what's going on in the head, because external changes may have a temporary fix, but they don't always fix the internal hurt.
Well, you were saying that, especially with females, they don't feel like they're being heard. So what I'm understanding is it important that you help children to understand, even at a very young age, that their voices are heard and what they have to say is meaningful. So how does a parent do that when we're busy and hustling with our daily? How do we help our children understand what they have to say is important?
I think that's a very good question, Mimi P. Because as I talk with my parents, I say to them, their parents do struggle, and there is no perfect parent. But sometimes just your presence and just letting your child know that you care and that you're there. Establishing that early relationship where your child feels safe to talk to you about anything. Sometimes it's requiring giving them time. And usually what I tell my clients is I have them think about it, and I say, tell me what you did at age 7 on your 7th birthday. Very often they cannot remember that. But if I have them tell me a time that they can remember when they were a child, they usually can share a meaningful event that happened with their parent. They usually can share that. And so I explain to them that, it's not always what you give your child that's important, but it's those meaningful times. And a lot of times children remember the most insignificant thing that you wouldn't think about, but it was with you, the parent. That's important. So again, just to summarize, it's learning to take the time with your child. Time doesn't have to be long, it just has to be important to the child. Sometimes putting aside your work. You can always come back to work, but time passes and your child gets older. So again, those would be some of the highlights I would say.
Well, what do you say to someone who say, well, I'm a single parent and I only have one child, so I don't really need to worry about my child being sexually abused? Isn't it still important that they teach them, because they also have relatives or other family members they're around? In most cases, over 90%, the children know or related to the person that did the sexual assault. So how would you approach someone who's just like, no, I keep my child mostly at home to myself?
Well, I would probably say the same thing I said before. You teach your child manners. You teach your child how to eat healthy. You teach your child how to clean themselves and hygiene. So being safe is also a part of what we teach and train our children. And we just never know what our children come up against in this life. And even though you keep them home, at some point you may send them to school. We send them to church. We send them on, maybe over a friend's house for an overnight. And we want them to be able to know what feels safe and what doesn't feel safe. And we want them to feel comfortable talking to us.
Well, let me ask you this, because in my book, My Body is a Sacrifice, and I also have a Facebook page, Mimi P LLC. I put on there that it's a good idea to maybe have a code word. A lot of people have more than 1 or 2 children, and there's a code word. And actually on RAIN, and that's double-N.org, there are stories on there. And one is how a lady said that she didn't never know she could be loved because it was her father who had been sexually assaulting her as a child. And what she learned is he apologized, but then he came back again after a while and started again. So I suggested maybe a parent have a code word. And even though both parents may be present, they don't share the code word with each other of the children. Is that a good idea?
I think that's an excellent idea to have a code word, especially, in your situation that you were talking about. The parent had already been abusing the child. So it is good to have a code word. Again, that's letting the child know that you hear them, that you recognize that they have a need, and you want to be there for them to protect them. So I think that's an excellent idea.
When I look at the study in this Child Advocacy Center, which is Nationwide Children's Hospital here in Columbus, is a member, it's saying over 98% of treatment of children who assaulted other children, that they have the success rate of the child not returning as an offender, attacking another child. In saying that, do we say parents should, if the one child sexually assault another, that it's okay to seek help?
Absolutely. I mean, if you feel that your child is suffering, I'm like, I think of it this way. If you knew your child was sick, would you not try to seek out medical care? Mental health, and a lot of times people compartmentalize our mental health and think that, that's over there in that area, and our physical is over here. And I tell people, we have one body, and our body is composed of the physical, the mental, physiological, spiritual, and cognitive, and they're all interconnected. If one area is suffering, believe me, it's going to affect the whole. So if you feel as the parent that your child is suffering, or even if you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to seek out a consultation. They may be fine, and that's great news, but it doesn't hurt to seek out mental health services.
So, if it's inside the family, it is a good idea for both the victim and the perpetrator to get some help to heal. But it's also a good idea maybe for the parent to get help, because parents carry a lot of guilt and shame to know that how can I have a household where a child offended another one of the others.
It's always good that if you find that your home is in turmoil, emotional turmoil, there may be what mental health is. Mental health is an outside person who should be working with the family or working with you as the parent in an unconditional fashion, not to blame you, but to give you a format so that you can share for support, recommendations, or whatever you need. Not all parents may feel that they need that. Maybe you don't feel ready, and that's okay, because it doesn't have to always be a today. You may find that over time you're not handling the situation well, or maybe it's caused a conflict between you and your child. Mental health is always there to help.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And in saying that, you're saying that it's good for the whole family, that maybe the parent don't want to get the immediate help, but maybe it's best that the children get it so they can start coping with it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Now, in having some years working with teenagers, I do want to put a clause on this that, just as a parent may not be ready, a child may not be ready as well. Sometimes you may feel that a teenager needs help. I would still say seek the help. I tell people this story all the time and I believe that it was to serve my profession for all these years, but I worked with a teenager who was dealing with a lot of trauma, a very hard family situation with a parent who had addiction issues. And for 2 years I worked with that teenager, and she would not speak to me. She would not talk. And so you could imagine that I would go in, similar to this, and try to do therapy, and I would tell myself, what's wrong with you? You're crazy to sit here with this teenager who would not speak to me. There was always something in my spirit, and what I learned from that experience is that the teen never spoke to me, but I was reminded within myself, spiritually, that while she did not speak to me, she could hear. So I would give positive messages, I would give direction, and one of the things about this profession is you never know how things are going to turn out. But years later, I ran into that teen, and she ran up to me, and she remembered me, and she was smiling, and she had a family. So I say that little story to say that as parents, as professionals, and talking with teenagers who you may feel will not speak, may not talk, I sometimes would advocate for a few sessions to engage them and say, okay, you don't want to come? I'll see you for 3 sessions. Can we agree to that? And just know that sometimes, even with children or teenagers, they may not say much. They may not act like they want to be there. But I'm a firm believer that even though they say nothing, they may act disgruntled, upset, but they hear. So give them a positive, supportive message.
I appreciate that. And I like to say I have a second book called A Parental Instructor's Guide to My Body as a Sacrifice, where I actually use biblical narratives to give people understanding of how this can affect not just the family, but society as a whole. So in that, I like to ask with your adult clients, are there some who say that they suffered sexual abuse as a child and then later in years it manifests in a crime, or with them being a victim of a crime?
Absolutely. Um, a large segment of particularly the correctional male population, even though a lot of times we don't think of males as being victims, I've had several clients where the male was victimized, and now I'm seeing them because they're either causing some other type of victimization. It could be sexual, it could be physical. Some of them are in for serious drug offenses or drug addiction that led to another crime. So again, I have definitely seen that, and with females. I have not worked with a large population of females who have been victimized as a child and then been incarcerated. I have not. But what I have had is females who have been victimized as a child and then maybe in another relationship as an adult where they have been physically abused, maybe even raped in several different relationships. And so you see that re-victimization pattern continuing.
How sad. But I'm hearing you constantly refer to alcohol and drugs. So a lot of different trauma leads to usage of opioids, whatever drug or alcohol. That's what they call self-medication?
Well, I know they haven't started out that way. But again, I have some of the cases where people have been addicted from very young, and they have continued their addiction into being older, and they say self-medication. And what I'm always trying to tease out, and sometimes, you know how you say the chicken, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Sometimes it's very difficult to determine if it's a drug substance abuse disorder, or is it a psychiatric disorder such as clinical depression or bipolar disorder. Sometimes it's very difficult, so one of the things often trying to work out or find out is what kind of started first. Were there a lot of traumatic and emotional issues that occurred which led to the drug addiction? Or, as we know, drug addiction and drug use can lead to psychiatric conditions as well. So that's how we have to sometimes tease that out, and sometimes it can be very difficult to do.
Well, what would you say to an adult, whether it be a male or a female, that is hearing this and they've been trying to figure out some kind of way to get some help because they suffer from child sexual abuse? Do they just go to anyone, or should they seek out someone who has professional help in that specific area?
Okay. And that's one thing I think is an excellent question, because I've had people come to me and sometimes say, oh, you're a psychologist, can I come see you? And one of the things that I explain to people is it's very important that if you are at the point where you're seeking mental health services, and you're seeing a psychologist, a social worker, licensed professional counselor, it is important to make sure that they have a specialization in the problems that you're experiencing. I know, when Mimi P first came to me, one of the things, you were looking for, as you were exploring what type of counselors are out there, it was, I want to work with somebody of color. And indeed, I hear that. And I think it's very helpful to find somebody who is of your race or ethnicity. That can be very valuable. But it would not be valuable if you seek someone out who is of your race or ethnicity and they do not have specialization in what you're looking for. So you have to keep that in mind when you're seeking out professional help.
Well, also I like to say, a lot of people when I've talked to, and although the majority be of the black race, I've talked to people of different races and religions and cultures. And it's across the board why do some people feel like it's just the black community that suffers and that? Why do people have that misguided thought that it's only to one nation or one religion or my religion, we don't cope with that? Why are people not knowledgeable that this is just a whole worldwide issue?
Well, I'm not quite sure, how, I'm probably not as aware that the black community feels like they monopolize or show more mental health issues. But what I would say is, I have found all races deal with problems of mental health nature and deal with it differently. I would also say that we are living in a world where probably in the last 10 years, people of any race have been comfortable thinking about mental health issues. It was only in the health bill that President Obama put out that included that insurances cover mental health. So we're not dealing that long ago where mental health was considered an acceptable condition that we would seek out through our insurance. So there's still a lot of stigma out there with all races about suicide, depression, anxiety. There's still a lot of stigma.
Okay, I just want to let people know you can get help out there through your insurance and even some of the jobs offer where you can get some assistance. I like to say we thank Dr. Barbara Scott for sharing her wisdom and giving us some guidelines. Also, I like to say, and my body is a sacrifice, that there is help out there. Again, thank you. You're in touch with Mimi P, LLC.